Noam, nice to meet you. I've heard your voice on your podcast for a while, but it's lovely to actually meet you in not person because you're in the U.S. and I'm in Israel. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
We have lots to cover.
Okay, I'm ready.
I want to um, dive straight into your role as both an educator, a fantastic creator of online educational but fun and engaging content about Israel and about Judaism. You've been doing a lot of amazing work. What happened to the kind of content that you put out and how you view your responsibility and the content that you've been putting out since October 7th?
Have you ever heard of Stephen Covey?
No.
Okay, so Stephen Covey is an American author. I think he's American. And he wrote a book called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. So I highly recommend that book. So I think I read it probably 15, 20 years ago, probably closer to 20 years ago. And in that book, he talks about the distinction between lots of interesting categories, but one of them that I think about often is the distinction between important and urgent. And I've had my entire life been deeply focused on the Jewish story. Even when I was a kid in high school, yes, I was, captain of the basketball team, captain of the soccer team, and those things. But the thing I cared about was being the leader of the Jewish space in my school, and I just cared a lot about that in Israel and Zionism. And to me, it's always been something that has felt urgent, even if it was in the category of important. And over the last 5 years or so, I've been doing all this content, unpacking Israeli history, the Unpacked YouTube channel, all the different content, Wandering Jews with Michal, like just a ton of content. And I've always felt like teaching about Israel and Zionism and Jewish identity is really important. That's why I wrote my dissertation on the topic. I think it's really important. Like you said, hopefully in a fun way and in not such a taxing way. But then the 7th of October happened, and it went from something that I think the world probably had viewed as something that's important to something that was urgent. And when the 7th of October happened, I actually had a panic attack. I was in New York at the time, and I am someone who describes. So I am a shomer Shabbat. I observe Shabbat, both the do's and the don't do's, the ases and the lo ta'ases. And it was Simchat Torah, and in the U.S., it was 2 days. And we had heard all of these things that had happened. We didn't know if it was rumors, and we didn't know. And we're trying to speak to people who are on their phones, and we're getting more and more and more information. And I knew that by the way, when I first heard it was just 40 people who were killed. I said, this is an inflection point in modern Jewish history. Something like this has not happened in 20 years. Something major is going to happen. And then we forget, then there's 100 people, there's 200 people, 300 people, 400 people, 5. And the story got bigger and bigger. And I could not, it was Simchat Torah, the day that we celebrate the Torah, the Hebrew Bible. And I had zero celebration in me. I just had anxiety. I didn't know what was going on, fear. And then I turned that anxiety, fear. I have family in Israel, by the way, like a bunch of family in Israel, close friends in Israel. And it went from being like, Noam, you have an important task in the world. You've always viewed it as urgent, but it's an important task, to amongst the most urgent of tasks for the world. Because put aside what happened that day, Israel and Zionism and Jewish history was on trial. And so how do you educate in a context where everyone is litigating? How do you educate in a context where people have strong opinions but have almost zero knowledge? How do you educate across political differences? How do you, after Israel suffered one of the most horrible moments in the last 100 years possible, how do you educate to an audience that doesn't see it that way? How do you deal with that? And on the other hand, be part of a family, that the Jewish people are my family and Israel is such a core part of my identity? How do you educate by feeling so attached to that people, but educate to an audience that doesn't necessarily see it at all like that? So my world, and it's not in the same way that Israelis, and I have a little bit of self-awareness to know that very differently than the way that Anouk, your world has changed, and the way that people around you have changed. Like I know it's not the same, not even close, not an iota, but the mission became urgent and the challenges became very real.
So you're an educator, foundationally you've studied education, you were a principal. How did you start? I mean, this is something that you'd been doing for a long time, but where did you start? I mean, you said it started with that panic attack. And if you want, you can talk a little bit more about how you kind of perhaps overcame that. And then what did you kind of quickly or less quickly understand that you needed to do in order to reach as many people as possible with messages that, by the way, and that's the reason I invited you on the podcast, and that I really respect the work that you do, is that you are a observant Jewish Zionist, believer in the Jewish state, believer in its great stories, and at the same time, you have a really nuanced, fact-based, historical approach to teaching it and to not putting things in black or white buckets, that I think is so important. But at a time when you must have felt that the majority of people in the world want things to be black or white. They want to be vindicated on, them or the causes they believe in being in the bucket of the white and the good, and the other, completely dehumanized and, even without having the knowledge. So you talk a lot about that knowledge and how important it is for people to just learn a little bit more than what they see on TikTok. How did you go about that task? Because to me, it sounds like such a daunting, almost impossible, Herculean task to take on in an age where really all the technology and all the politics and the psychology of people in our modern Western age is really against people like you who just teach facts, basically.
That's so well said. This modern world is against me, Noam Weissman. But it's
Yeah.
true. It's what you
I
said.
didn't mean it that
I
way.
know.
No, I'm not against you.
No. I know, but I love that point. We, I'm speaking about I, but it's we at Unpacked. But I'm just going to be more of a human about it as opposed to like a brand about it. So if that's okay, I'm going to say I to the audience
Sure,
listening. I
sure.
hope that
I
that's okay.
saw your coworker as we started the
Yeah. It's
recording. I know there's great people.
we have an amazing team, 55 people on our team. We make YouTube content and podcast content and social first content. And it's an amazing team. But I'm going to speak, I'm going to say I. I'm not trying to be narcissistic. I'm just saying I so that we can have a
Sure.
normal conversation. So I saw this recently where someone asked, why do people tell other young people that babies come from storks? Very simple. Ready for this? Because the truth is hard to handle. That's it. It's very simple. That's it. That's why we do things like that. Meaning we tell stories, we create mythology, because we believe that the world, the people we're communicating with, simply cannot handle the truth in all of its complexity. And I believe that if I start speaking to my 1.5-year-old and tell her how babies are born, she'll just throw yogurt in my face and be like, you're gaga. She won't say anything. And if I say that, if I tell my 7-year-old how babies are born, then she'll be like, ew, Abba, you're gross. So like, I don't even know what you're saying. If I do that to my 9-year-old or 12-year-old, okay, so now we're having a conversation. But the reason we stay away from it is because it's too difficult to handle. Teaching about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and about Zionism, for a lot of people, they're still in that stage of being told the story as though babies come from storks. Babies don't come from storks. Listeners, I'm sorry. And if you listen to the sexual and intimacy episode of Anouk, you will know that's not where babies come from. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict, or any issue that is an area of conflict, any issue that's an area of tension, you are right that social media first seems to be suggesting you have to be on this side or you have to be on that side. You have to be, and by the way, and if you're like at the mushy middle, then you're also picking a side. And you're also getting, hairs to raise on people's arms. Yeah, and in a good way, by the way, you're getting more and more and more views. What we said is actually let's try to do something a little countercultural, by the way, which is what the Jewish people have been doing from time immemorial. Let's be a little bit countercultural. Let's not try to just get people's rage going, and let's not just try to get people's dopamine going and endorphins flying through the roof. Let's actually not do that. Let's figure out a way to teach the story of Israel and all of its complexity, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and let's see what could happen out of that. Let's see if people can handle it. And guess what? People can handle it. People can really, not only can people handle it, people are interested in it. People want it. People are actually, if you put them in a place that they're relaxed and they have hishtavut hanefesh, they have a little bit of equanimity, they're able to actually say, I actually love learning the entire story. I don't want to just be the soldier that's there to fight. I want to be like Julia Galef speaks about. I want to be that scout that's there to explore. I thank you, Noam, for doing that. So when the 7th of October happened and I went into panic mode, like I said, I had one day, I give it one day where I gave myself the permission to not be Noam Weissman, to not be me, and to fight, to tell the world how awful everyone on the progressive left were, and to just you're all evil and bad and you just don't get it. And I hate you, you hate me, and that's what it is. I gave myself a day to do that. I gave myself a day. And I understand why people need 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, a year, a couple years, and people that suffer from the immense trauma that their families have gone through. Like, I have zero judgment, like zero. But me as an educator, I have a different responsibility. And in that one day, I said something on my podcast. I don't remember exactly what it was. Now I do. I remember it. What I said was, basically, Hamas, what you have done, and maybe some of your listeners will agree with this, still, what you have done by doing what you did on the 7th of October, every single thing that the Israeli army is about to do in response to you is on your hands, not on anybody else's. And I had a number of listeners reach out to me afterwards, be like, no, I'm not part of the Rah-Rah Israel world. I'm not part of this Rah-Rah Shishkabah, like go Israel, go world. I'm actually, not Jewish. I'm on the left. I'm a Muslim. And I've been listening to you for a while. You lost me. Like, what? Like, you seem like you're talking down to me, and I'm out. I'm not going to be a listener anymore. And I thought about that. And did I get more and more listeners after I did what I did? Of course. People were like, again, their endorphins were going. They're like, oh yeah, let's go. Like Noam, let's go, let's fight.
Yeah, this is a guy who will give us the ammo, that we
he's
need to kind of fight the intellectuals.
Exactly. And I chatati. I believe I made a mistake. And I left my role as an educator. My number one thing when I speak to educators, when I speak on podcasts, is we have to be educators. Other people could be pundits, but if there are young people in the world that are looking up to you and they want to actually understand not just the facts, Anouk, if I could add, but the implications of the facts, the shades of the stories, the textures, eventually people will turn to more knowledgeable others or people who they respect, and they will want to see that those shades. And if they feel like you lied to them, then you no longer have the ability or the authority to engage with them. They will turn to somebody else. And so that's what happened. One day I gave myself that permission to go into fight mode, and then I switched into education mode.
I think it's interesting because it's the first time that I realize that there are many tools that one can have to kind of exit out of that fight mode. But I think that a lot of what I'm doing here on the podcast is really talking about the mental health, the
Yeah.
psychology of this war, how it has deeply impacted our sense of self, our sense of safety, um, our levels of resilience. People prone to certain kind of, to anxiety might have experienced more. Um, what for me I found is that the default, when October 7th happened, because I'm Jewish, because I live in Israel, because I have children who one day are supposed to serve in the military, whatever I think about that, I went into that camp. I went into that tribalism. And on the other hand, I have those tools. In my case, not tools as an educator, but tools as a meditator and tools as someone who has a deep interest in mental health and how psychology works. I realized pretty quickly that I was in that very tribal place of us versus them. I only want to be in the company of Jews. That's it. I'm out. I was a lefty, but the left has betrayed me. And, all these, it just touches on all these really primal places of betrayal and abandonment and terror and all those things that just make you automatically go into one camp, the camp that feels safe, the
Right.
camp that validates you, the camp that sees you. And I'm working with that all the time. Perhaps, because I live in Israel, for me, it's a constant battle that I have. Um, and then when I go into that place of meditation, of kind of seeing the bigger picture, seeing all these humans and the deep suffering and the stories that people cling to, that their fathers and grandmothers and the foundational stories of their identities. And it's like suddenly I have this wider view. And that's what I'm trying to share on this very humble podcast. What are some of the things that you did that you think like worked? What are some of the topics that you took on that you said these are topics that I maybe hadn't touched on before that really need to be addressed? And what do you feel like really resonated with people? What were people looking for when they came to your content?
Yeah. First of all, I want to ask you. I mean, I need more meditation in my life, so I need to learn that from you. I actually think about this often. I need to meditate more, and I don't have the correct tools for that. So you're gonna have to teach that to me. So I want to think about what you said about the tribal aspect. I'm tribal also, and I'm wondering. Of course, I'm tribal. We're all tribal. I'm Jewish, and everyone should be tribal to an extent. Um, that's what when you watch the World Cup, you're rooting for Bulgaria or not because you are tribal. Like you're not you're rooting for Brazil because you are tribal or because you think they have the most gorgeous football or soccer.
Uh-huh.
Could you just talk me through a little bit more? What do you mean by the downsides of tribalism?
If I'm interested a little bit in the kind of evolution of our psychology, and I think tribalism was absolutely crucial for humanity to survive, for learning to work in groups, for cooperation, and what tribes have a tendency to do, and one of the reasons that humans flourished and not apes is that tribes were able to start forming cultures. And by cultures, I mean stories, just like you said, the story of the stork. And those stories became narratives and, ancestral kind of almost mythical stories that we cling to. And I think when I feel is tribalism is not to feel shame about it because it is so deeply human to feel more at ease with people who eat the same foods and have the same jokes and you're safe there. If the world turns against you, that is your ultimate, that's the family.
Right.
um on the other hand, I think that one of the things that tribalism leads to is often a kind of complete disconnect from anyone who's outside that tribe, especially if you feel like your life, your existence, or even your identity is at risk because Noam, as a Jew, like you said, you're not in Israel, but your identity as a Jew is being pummeled, is being attacked, is being denigrated as a Jew or as a Zionist. And so I think when we feel it, when we feel threatened, it's a very natural human response to then not be able to see the other. And my feeling was, as I listened to your podcast, that you did go through a journey, and that, for example, you did like a two-part series on the West Bank and on what many will term the occupation, and you did a two-part series on Israeli Arabs, and maybe that's not necessarily your comfort zone, your tribe, but it is an attempt to ultimately do what we also know is right, is to be able to open our hearts to the human that doesn't feel so comfortable, that I feel a little bit awkward around, because I
Right.
know, we're supposed to be enemies, and so I really appreciated those episodes that you did. And I'm wondering if that was the result of this kind of like internal grappling with all this noise that came out of chastising Israel as the oppressor and as the colonialist white invader. I think you mentioned a statistic that says that like 55% of 18 to 24-year-olds in the United States say that Israel should cease to exist and should be handed over to Hamas and the Palestinians. So those must be statistics that are very difficult for anyone to hear, but for you, the facts a lot
Yeah.
better than a lot of people. And I'm wondering if that is kind of, those episodes that you put out are a way to almost kind of reassure yourself that Israel is not perfect, but it's still this place that you love and that you believe in.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, this is let me just say that this might be very in the weeds, but let me just explain again who I am as a person. I am somebody who says, can I speak in Hebrew? Do you ever say
Yeah.
things in Hebrew? I'm someone who says a bracha on Yom Ha'atzmaut and on Yom Yerushalayim before Hallel. Meaning, not only do I say Hallel, the Thanksgiving prayer, on Israel's Independence Day and on Jerusalem Day, but I say it with a blessing. And that's in the weeds when you think about it from a religious perspective. But what that means is I so deeply, fervently, religiously believe that the Jewish state is one of the crowning achievements of Western civilization. I believe that. I also deeply believe, as someone that is an aspiring religious Jew, that so much of that should be attributed to God. I said the G word. I did it. Okay. I believe that. I, Noam Weissman, believe that. And the sacrifices of many, many, many men and women who made it possible, et cetera, like very much so. Okay. That's the bilateral relationship between man and God that I deeply believe in. That is part of me, Noam Weissman. Another part of me, Noam Weissman, is that believing that, having full faith in that, without any doubt, leads to extremism. And the integration of faith and doubt for me is how I believe I can be a healthy Zionist, a healthy religious person, somebody who is not so sure of himself fully, not so
Mm-hmm.
sure. I do have questions. I do want to make sure that it is the case that I could be those things and at the same point in time not close my eyes to the reality that exists. And what young people have been saying for a long time is stop asking us to close our eyes. Just stop asking us to do that. We're not going to do that. We're not going to listen to you. Don't do the myths and facts thing about Israel. It's not real. It's not real. And on the other side of things, there's this tribal protection that I really feel for the Jewish people, that I don't think that a lot of people are acting in good faith when they attack Israel. They're not simply criticizing Israeli policy. They're not simply saying, "Hey, listen, Israel, of course you have the right to exist. Of course your people have security. Of course. But you know what? If you did this policy a little bit differently, then you'd be in a healthy place for society." They're not doing that. And I think what happens is tribal people, all of us, end up responding to those people who are not acting in good faith. And utilize that same sort of reaction that they would when they respond to people who are criticizing Israel or asking questions about Israel in good faith. And that becomes the challenge because of the reality that so many people in the world are antagonistic towards Israel, are hateful towards Zionism, fight Israel. That leads to people needing to be fully defensive and fully tribal. And I want to resist that fully. I want to resist that. I want to say, those people are acting in bad faith. Darn it, I don't care about you. Get out of my face. But the people that are acting in good faith, and there are many people who are acting in good faith, they want to understand the story better, and I want them to come to me. I believe that I have a way, hopefully, me and other people that could say, guys, there's such beauty in the story of Israel and Zionism. This is a remarkable romantic story. And a romantic story is not a story that just ends with the kiss on the lips and then forever after. It's a story that's going to have ups and downs. It's a story that's going to have order, disorder, reorder. That's good. All of this is going to happen. But this is the Jewish story. And it's part of our prayers also. When I think about our prayers, I think about the prayer that I love so much is the prayer of Aleinu that we say at the end of every prayer service, at the end of Shacharit, at the end of Mincha, at the end of Mariv, the morning, the afternoon, the night prayers. And what it is it's twofold. It's the first paragraph speaks about the uniqueness of the Jewish people and the unique relationship that we have with the Jewish people, that we have with God. And the second paragraph is all about, well, if it's just that, then what's the point? It can't just be that. It's about a universal impulse as well. And so Aleinu, the prayer of Aleinu, is this tribal prayer, first paragraph, and the universal prayer, second half. The story of the Jewish people is the ability to say, I don't just exist in order to exist. The Jewish continuity, if the goal is just this concept of continuity, of continuing to exist, Israel is just there to exist. There are 195 countries, I don't know, maybe 200 countries, whatever the number is. Okay, who cares? Israel doesn't exist in order to exist. Israel exists in order to do something incredible, in order to be something that's a beacon of light. So I put all that together, and that's me. That's my story. So yes, I want to teach facts, Anouk. Yes, I want to teach interpretations, implications of facts. Yes, I want people to ask questions about Israel. Yes, I want people to be so connected to Israel and Zionism. Yes, I love the Jewish story. Yes. The word and comes up a lot in my life. So I'm an and person, and it could be exhausting for people who have to engage with me.
Yeah, it can be exhausting, I imagine, for you as well, because it
Yes.
is for me. Um, I grew up. I just, before we started the recording, I told you I grew up in a secular but very Zionist Belgian household, and I grew up with all these stories, the stork stories of Judaism and Zionism and heroism and righteousness and goodness and all these extraordinary things, and they seeped into me, and they meant so much. They were such a foundational part of my identity. And when I started studying journalism and then working as a journalist and then moving to Israel, um, I started feeling shame about those kind of blank slate knight on a wise horse stories that I had imbibed, and slowly they started disintegrating to the point where I just kept all of it, all of Judaism and Zionism at arm's length. Really confused about how I felt about it all, really angry a lot of the time at my own people, of course very angry at the ones who kind of just blame without knowing the facts, but not really knowing myself, what I believe anymore. And for myself and for a lot of people, also that I interview on my podcast, October 7th was a kind of reawakening of a connection to Judaism.
Yeah.
It's kind of like by being with your back against the wall with, exterminators wanting to exterminate you because of that very thing. That is basically what comes out. That's the identity that suddenly because I am rejected for it. I and a lot of people kind of start to embrace it. um, I wonder if that, you know, if you found that to be the case for a lot of people, maybe who started listening to your content after October 7th. And at the same time, you know, when I hear you also talking about the, you know, the light onto the nations and those um, ideas and kind of archetypes that you and I probably grew up on to an extent, I imagine like some of my peace activist friends kind of listening to that and saying, like, again, you know, the stork. And when you compare that to what has been happening in Gaza and the suffering there, how do you talk about that?
The first thing that I would do immediately is to create a culture of curiosity as opposed to compliance. That's number one. Curiosity over compliance. What happens very often is when people hear this, what you're talking about, is this young Jewish person who's like, listen, I don't understand what's going on, and like, it's like, I don't agree with it. We don't want to engage them to make sure they comply to whatever we think and say. That's like that's the instinct for many of us. Oh, just get them to think what we think. Okay, got it. And here's how to get them there. Okay, got it. So we'll do that, and they will now comply. A different approach is to be much more curious with them and to allow them to to not try to prove anything to them, to not try to persuade them in any sort of way, but to engage with them and to really be curious. And that's number one. On top of that is my approach to them would be to allow them, like I was saying, to allow them to end more of their sentences with question marks and exclamation points. I think that's like, I think of that just simply is countercultural as well. So to do question marks, questions, like sometimes, like my friend Gil Troy would say, sometimes you have to do exclamation points, and you have to have them to be like very vociferous about whatever it is that they should be. But I would argue more and more and more that we already have a surplus. We have a surplus of advocacy, and we have a deficit of inquiry. So that's the second thing I would say. The third thing I would say is that we have to be okay with if our expectation of the state, whatever the state is, wherever you live, is to be fully in agreement with your ideology. Let's think out loud together for a second. Then what you love is not the state. What you love is you. You love you. And if every single thing that a country does needs to fit within your way of thinking about something, ask what that means. Because what you're saying is, in order to have a relationship with something, call it a spouse, call it a child, call it a teammate, if it has to be fully in line with you, then what does that mean? The way I view the Jewish story, Israel, where almost 50%, 46% of world Jewry lives, the way I view it is based on something that Adin Steinsaltz, of blessed memory, Rabbi Steinsaltz, said, which is that we are not a religion. Sure, religion's a part of who we are. It's a part of us, but it's not who we are. We're not an ethnicity. We're not a culture. We're not a race. Surely Hitler got that one wrong. We are an extended family. That's what we are. A family that goes thousands of years back, that has brought other people into the family. And sometimes families could be dysfunctional, but they're your family. There are major goals, like I was saying earlier, of Zionism, and major achievements that have happened as a result of Zionism. And I think we should be teaching that. Number one, I'm just going to say this, that I really deeply believe this. This is from the sermon from Chaim Hazaz, who said, "Eini michabed ha-historia ha-Yehudit." I don't respect the story of Jewish history, which was basically a story that the non-Jewish world, says Chaim Hazaz, created for the Jews. Meaning, he says that they milked the cow for us on the Sabbath. They made history for us the way they wanted, and then we took it whether we liked it or not. But it wasn't ours. It wasn't ours at all. The story of Israel is the story of what happens when the Jewish people come together and create something. It's our story. It is it's our story. So let's make it an amazing story. Be part of the story. Be engaged with the story. It's your story. It's not a story that anyone's created for you. And if you don't like that story, then it's on you to create the next chapter in that story. And then this idea that comes from Achad Am, which is always part of the Zionist story, and it feels like it just gets ignored by the political and the military and the technology and the economy. But there's something else, which is the Jewish state has created a culture that the Jewish people are now going to be able to continue their chapter in the Jewish story, because culture has now emanated from Zion. A new reality has emanated from Zion: sports, arts, music, food. And to be part of that is to be part of this Jewish family. So I would say to people, young people who are struggling with this, yes, I struggle with it too. I'm not asking you to comply. I'm not asking you to agree. If you do agree with the Israeli military and Israeli politics, great also. Like, you're allowed to. By the way, we don't have to apologize for that. You're allowed to agree with the Israeli military, and you're allowed to agree with the Israeli political system and not be a bad person. Half of the Israeli country, if not more, is that. And they are not bad people. They are allowed to fully agree with what's going on because there are reasons for what's going on. There are challenges the other side is doing that's making it this way, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not talking about who's right and who's wrong on that side. I'm just talking educationally, right? So if we allow them, number one, to say it's possible that Israel's doing the right thing. And then number two is, if Israel's not doing the right thing, that doesn't mean that you dismiss the relationship. That's not the way you engage with your family. And by the way, here are some amazing things that this family is doing. And like, get involved, be part of it. Don't just like be a keyboard warrior. Don't just be, or what's even worse, don't be an apathetic person who just doesn't care about the story because you disagree with aspects of the story, even important aspects of the story. It's your story. It's your story. So do something about it. Don't just fight that one thing. Engage, be part of the culture, be part of the story, be constructive, not just destructive. Stop just telling everyone why they're so awful, but also build people up.
What you said reminded me of an article I read recently. Um, I think it was in the Atlantic that talked about the fact that increasingly young people are actually going completely silent on their families, on their parents especially. And there's like in the US, and there are these entire support groups of parents whose children have abandoned them because the children say, that their relationships are unhealthy for them and it's traumatizing. And not denigrating that, I think there is a real realization in the next generation of kind of like transgenerational trauma and all these kind of terms that
Yep.
are popular today, and for good reason. But it was talking about how this a lot of people are just choosing to not engage when it feels deeply uncomfortable. And let's
Yep.
admit, slightly dysfunctional or very dysfunctional relationships with parents can be the hardest, most uncomfortable thing if you have to go to a Thanksgiving dinner and relive, the trauma, etc. But it was actually advocating for the fact that, there is something that we're missing, willing to kind of grapple with these issues that are, again, foundational to our story. If you,
Yeah.
and I see it around me, and Israelis around me who are leaving Israel, and my friends going to Costa Rica and Portugal, and who knows, I might do it one day, so definitely not judging. But for now, I have decided that as much as it is so difficult for me to see some of the acts of the Jewish state, and I think it's because I hold it to such a higher standard, because I was brought up thinking that it was, this kind of larger than life, can do no wrong place. I think,
Infallible place. And then
yes,
and then all of a
yes,
sudden you go to Israel, and like, but David McGordon said you see garbage people, you see prostitutes, you see all different sides, and guess what? That's Israel, because it's a real place, it's a real country. I'm like, that's okay, not just okay, like, okay, amazing. And now what? Now what's the aspiration?
yeah, yeah. For me in Israel, it's just this, ultimately this feeling that when I walk in the street, I can be fully myself. I can be Jewish. I can not have this kind of wonder all the time when I walk in the street or when I talk to people. Should I mention it? Should I not mention it? And there really is this feeling in this country that everybody's family. I always tell this story that I went to a museum, and I wasn't allowed to go into part of the museum with a stroller. And I left my baby with a kind of security attendant. I didn't ask her name. She was like, Tashiroto iti, like, just leave him with
Leave
me.
with
And I
me.
was like,
Yeah.
okay, sure. Here's my number. Call me if there's anything.
That's
I wouldn't do
unbelievable.
that in any other place in the world. I mean, maybe I should be, maybe
No,
child support should knock at my door. But I think it was
that's
valid
amazing.
because I felt so comfortable. It was just
Family.
natural. It's like, yeah, that woman looks like, I don't know, like my grandmother. Um,
That's
and
amazing.
so, yeah, I think, we're both talking about that kind of deeply difficult, but deeply uh, uh, inspiring place to be in, which is this middle, this kind of murky, conflicted middle where you have the emotions of love and passion, and at the same time, the kind of confusion and shame and guilt, and they're your fact that you're holding on to while knowing that there are other facts that say different things, and it's such a difficult place to be in. But if I can say something Jewish, because you make all the Jewish references, because I'm
Sorry.
not there, that's not my thing, but I do remember that we're all about asking questions, you know
Yeah.
ask questions, right?
Yeah.
um by the way, when your teacher, educator, I was always the one in the front row, in the center,
Yeah.
the whole class kind of having my hand raised, my finger, asking questions and questions and questions, and shushing the kids in the back because I couldn't hear what the teacher was
That's
saying.
amazing.
And yeah, I think after our conversation, I'm going to lean more into daring to ask the questions, knowing that the answers might make me uncomfortable. Um,
That's
and then
okay.
I think there's the next step is well, what tools do we have to be with the discomfort? Because
Yep.
that's also something, to ask a kind of 17-year-old to be with the discomfort of seeing the whole, feeling like the whole world hates them. It's normal they might disconnect.
Yeah, totally. Totally. But you know what? There's nothing as joyful as the security of being with your loving family. There's nothing. There's nothing as joyful when you have security. I don't mean physical. I mean like just security of being with people that you belong, that you're not trying to fit in, but that you belong. Fitting in is the opposite of belonging. It's the exact opposite of belonging. And so many of us in life, we put on our masks to try to fit in to whatever in society. But when you're with your family, you you don't try to fit in. You just belong. And that's the joy. That's the joy of this whole thing. And my fear is that when you're talking about Costa Rica and Portugal, and I'm an American, so born in America, I've lived in Israel for a few years, but broadly speaking, American. I'm just telling you my reaction because you said you're not judging. Um, it makes me nervous. It makes me sad. Because, and I get it. But the number one thing that the what's driving the Palestinian cause against Israel is the belief that, like all colonizers, eventually you will leave when it gets too difficult. That is their belief. And so when I have my friends who have lived in Israel their whole lives and are choosing to leave Israel now, it just because Israel's not colonizers. That's not what Zionism is. Not colonialism. It's not imperialism. Listen to unpacking Israeli history. It's not. It's the wrong terminology. It's not. It's not. It's not. But I get nervous. I get nervous when I hear that people are leaving Israel because of the very real pain and trauma, and people hearing it from an American. Like, who are you to say anything? I'm just looking at it from a different perspective, and it just makes me nervous and sad. And the Jewish people are connected to the land of Israel as much as any people is connected to any land, any land. But the Jewish people also have the ability to go to Portugal and Costa Rica and live there if they want.
Yeah, and I, just to give you context, I do think that some people are leaving for security reasons because they've been
Yeah.
genuinely traumatized and are
Yes.
scared. And I have a friend of a friend, one of the last Houthi missiles fell into her apartment building, and the next day she was like, "That's it, I'm
That's
going."
it. How? Come
But
on. How could you not get that?
yeah, but at the same time, I want to tell you that most of the people that I know, the kind of liberal Tel Aviv, whatever. Again, I'm trying to not be in my
Yeah.
tribal buckets. But for a lot of those people, it's not as much the missiles from Hamas and the terrorist attacks and the Houthis and Hezbollah and
Yeah.
Iran. It's the betrayal that they feel from their own people, from their
Yeah.
own government. It's the deep, divide that is currently felt, where a big portion of the population, it doesn't feel that they are seen, and feels, yeah, hated.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's driving a lot of these people away. And I tell them, but if you leave, who are you leaving us with?
Yeah. Before the 7th of October, people forget that. I'm not just going to mention the judicial reforms. People forget that there were conversations. There were small conversations, but conversations about whether or not the Jewish state should be divided into two statelets. One called Yehuda, and one called Yisrael. One like, and if you
One call
wanted,
Tel Aviv.
right? I mean,
Give
that's what
me
they.
one call Tel
Well,
Aviv,
that's
please.
that would be Israel, and that the Jewish people have always had two different kingdoms at different points in their history. There's been Yehuda and Israel, and you know what? Maybe there should be a Yehuda and Israel. Now, I would be very, 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 very sad about that. But like, this is very real, and we have to. These are the issues that, now put aside the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. This is what I want to solve, because I think this is harder to solve, but also probably more important to solve. We have to figure out as a people we are very different. We are very different, and that's okay. We are family. And Anouk, I view you as family. I do. I view you as family, a very extended family from Belgium, and now in Israel. But you're my family. You're my family, and I feel that. I really feel that, and I want to bring that feeling to more and more Jewish people and to non-Jewish people, to be able to see this story of this amazing family, this accomplished family, this family that fights with each other, this family that divides every now and then. But this family, I just want to. Do you mind if I just end? I just have an idea that I just read in Natan Sharansky, and I said this in my Unpacking Israeli History podcast, and I want to tell you something that he says in Natan Sharansky, the Soviet refusenik, who was in the Gulag for 9 years, and he was actually in a punishment cell for 405 days over the course of his time there. And he says, no matter how lonely I might have seemed to be in my punishment cell, I survived by knowing I had not been abandoned by my people. That's it. We don't abandon each other. We're a people. We're biyachad. We're together. And that's the way I feel.
I have two more questions for you. I assume the majority of my listeners are Israelis, Jewish. I hope I get some listeners who are not, even though I know it's probably hard for them. What would you say today to, and I know you know many, to Palestinians, to Gazans, if you could talk to them? If you went beyond the tribalism, what would you want to say to them?
I would say let's not be conflict entrepreneurs, and let's not allow conflict to sustain us, to be intoxicated by it. I would ask the question, what could you do to stop being intoxicated by it? And I have to ask myself that same question. Don't tell me what I could do differently, and I won't tell you what you could do differently. What can you do differently? And I'm going to answer and explore that with my people as well.
And then what do you think has given you the strength to continue doing what you're doing? You must, I assume that as someone who talks about Zionism, you must have been getting some hate comments. Even if you don't, I assume that you can imagine them based on a lot of what you read. Yeah. What has kind of given you this integrity, this backbone, this courage to tackle this subject? And are you ever afraid? And if you are, what brings you beyond that fear to action?
Principle. That's it. Like, we're allotted 70 years, 80 years, 90 years. I don't know if we're lucky 100 years. That's it. That's all we got. Do something meaningful. Do something that's going to make an impact on the world. Figure out a way to marry your talents with where there's a major need, where your curiosity leads you. And if I can't ask these questions, if I can't assert my identity in the many non-Jewish contexts that I am in very often, and when I tell people, I start very often, when people ask me, who are you? Like, finish that sentence. I'm a proud Jew. I'm a Zionist. That's who I am. A father of 4, son of 2, brother of 3 others, part of the Jewish people. And we have a mission. We have a vision. We have things to accomplish. And it's not just about protecting myself. It's about doing something really good for the world. It's not just about continuing. It's about providing something that the world deeply needs. And what the world deeply needs is the ability to speak across differences, to listen across differences, and to be willing to be proud of your identity and really be proud of who you are without thinking that it's the sum total of the world. And if we could do that, I think we bring Messiah.
Thank you so much, Noam. I want to encourage my listeners to listen to your podcast. Like I said, one of the episodes that I found most fascinating is when you dared to ask the question, is Israel an apartheid state?
Yeah.
And you didn't just ask it rhetorically. You actually investigated and you said some things that are difficult to hear as a Jew and as an Israeli. And I think that's really important, really crucial coming from someone like you. So thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me. Really, really appreciate the conversation.